Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting, the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for October the 16th. We'll call the meeting to order with a roll call vote. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Present.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Present.
And Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Present.
And the chair votes present also. Next item on the agenda is the setting of the agenda. Do we have any changes, deletions, additions, moving around, relocating, anything that changes the agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
Sir, I move to accept the agenda as it's presented.
Proper motion for a second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that also. Let's go to item 2 then. Actually, I guess citizen comments are next, but I don't see any citizens jumping up to make any comments. So we'll go to approval of minutes, consideration of approval of minutes for September the 11th. Hope everyone's had a chance to read those, any corrections or deletions to the minutes. If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Proper motion and a second. Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Peterson, how you vote?
Yes.
How do you vote? And the chair votes yes also on that. Minutes are approved. Let's go to item 3 then, which is new business, report of the actuary on the city's defined benefit pension plans. Christine, you're going to introduce our guest.
I would be happy to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For several years now, in the fall, this committee has heard reports from 3 of our licensed independent professionals who really assist us and help ensure compliance with some very important areas of public finance. In September, you heard from the city's investment advisor, government portfolio advisors. Here in October, we have Kevin Sullivan with USI. He is the licensed actuary for the city's closed defined benefit pension plan. His firm also serves as the actuary to the State of Tennessee Department of Treasury, to the TCRS, Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. So while he is not necessarily the licensed actuary on that account, he is very familiar with the assumptions of that state plan, and he does present to you a summary of the city's actuarial results for the open plan that is with the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. And then in December, the last meeting of the year, we don't have a November meeting, but in December, you will be hearing from Crossland, the city's independent auditor, who is auditing our records right now for fiscal year 25. They're on site as we speak, and you'll get to hear from Crossland in December. So that's just a little bit of background that we do use this committee as a form of an audit committee, and these 3 functions are very important, that we ensure compliance with many, many different regulators and many different rules that we have in public finance. So with this, Kevin Sullivan is going to present on both of our pension plans, our defined benefit pension plans, which do have, certainly they have liability, they have assets as of the pension reporting dates, and we also have employer contributions that are required, and those calculations are prepared by USI following these independent standards. So I will let Kevin address you.
Thanks, Christine. So some of you have seen this information before, but hopefully you'll still pick up a couple of nuggets of new information as we go through this. And I may go through some of this early information quickly, just for the sake of time. But a few of the things I want to cover, just a little bit of background information on the planned populations, also talk a little bit about assumption updates that have happened over the last couple of years, some key results for the 2025 valuation, a little bit of demographic information on the legacy plan, the closed plan, and then a little information on the TCRS open plan. And it might surprise you that we're now at the point where, well, a little bit of background information here on slide 2. So anyone hired after January 1, 2017 went into the TCRS plan. Hired before that date, you're in the legacy plan. We're actually now at the point, only 8 years in, that we have slightly more active members in the TCRS plan than in the legacy plan. Now, that does not mean that we're roughly split equally on liabilities and assets for those plans. As you might imagine, the folks in the legacy plan have much longer service, tend to be older, tend to have higher compensation due to longer service, and therefore the liabilities are higher in that plan for the active members. Also, the vast majority of the retirees are in the legacy plan, and their liabilities are in that plan as well. So that's going to be the case for many, many more years, that the liabilities and assets for that legacy plan are much larger than the TCRS plan, but slowly over time they'll reach parity, and then as the active population shrinks in the legacy plan, as the retiree population will peak and then slowly begin to decline over time, we'll have the situation where the majority of the liabilities in the TCRS plan. But again, that will take probably a number of decades before we get to that point. And again, the legacy plan does have a number of tiers in the plan. I won't spend a lot of time on the differences here, but tend to be different benefit structures for different groups of folks based on when they were hired into the plan. So a little bit about assumption updates on slide 4. So we've been going through a process where we've been slowly lowering the discount rate by 10 basis points a year. Last year we were at 6.8%. That's now been lowered to 6.75%, and that was based on resolution 2025-18, and this also matches the current investment assumption for the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System plan. Now, TCRS recently conducted their experience study where they review all of their assumptions, and they elected to leave the discount rate at 6.75%. So it's going to be a few more years before they pick up that assumption again and review it. So I think 6.75% is likely the rate we're going to be using in this plan for a few more years. But both based on our review of the asset mix of the plan a few years from now for the next experience study, and TCRS's any potential change they make at what should be a very similar time, about 4 years out, we'll take a look at what discount rate may be appropriate at that time. If it's to leave it unchanged, lower it, raise it, whatever's appropriate at that time. And that change to the discount rate of just the 5 basis points from 6.8 to 6.75% did have the impact of raising the liability by about $1.2 million and increasing the contribution by a couple of $100,000. And again, that's been a practice or a pattern for the last several years as we lowered it by 10 basis points. So it's actually been higher in recent years than it is this year because we're only lowering it by 5 basis points. For the 2025 valuation, we've also continued to use our same mortality assumption that we updated, I believe, a year earlier. And this is in accordance with TCA 9-3-501. That requires us to use projected mortality improvements. And our base table is 105% of the RP 2014 healthy annuitants and non-annuitants table based on blue collar. As you might imagine, mortality varies across the country based on geography, and within geography it can deviate based on economic conditions within the area. So this is actually a better, from the participant standpoint, mortality assumption than most of Tennessee. Tennessee tends to be closer to 115% or 110% of that average. Given our area right here, we think we would see slightly better mortality than the state of Tennessee as a whole, but slightly less favorable than perhaps the country as a whole. And we are using 10 years of mortality improvements based on the most recently available scale produced by the Society of Actuaries, which is scale MP 2021. A few other comments on the assumptions. The COLA we're leaving at 2.0%. Some of the additional assumptions, such as the salary increase assumption, rates of retirement, rates of termination, we've left unchanged. As we move through time, as that active population shrinks, and it has been shrinking already, obviously, since 2017, these assumptions will be less significant because it's actions of the active members, so retirements, termination, salary increases, they'll become less significant, while mortality arguably will become more significant as we have more and more retired members. So that is something that we'll certainly keep an eye on in years ahead for all of those assumptions. Moving over to slide 6, some information on asset return for the 2024 year. So each year we calculate the expected return for the plan and compare that to actual return, and we smooth in gains and losses over a 5-year period. The purpose of this is that if we use market value each year to value the funded status of the plan and the recommended contribution, we'd have considerable contribution volatility. Using a 5-year average helps smooth out those gains and losses over time and produces a smoother trajectory of the contribution. If the contribution's increasing, we'd still like it to increase at a general consistent rate. If it's going to decrease at a consistent rate, not have choppiness with the rate whipsawing back and forth from year to year. So for the 2024 year, we began with market value of $159.4 million. We weight the expected contributions and distributions coming in to get kind of a blended value for the year of about 157.1, and our expected return based on the beginning of year 6.8% discount rate would be about 10.7 million. And then we compare that with the actual return, and that produced a positive variance of about 2.5 million, meaning that we had better return than expected. And so that means we had an asset gain, and we will smooth that in over a 5-year period. Over the last 4 years, if we look at all the gains and losses that we blend in, we've had 3 years of gains. Those are the numbers shown as negative numbers. Including a relatively large gain for 2021 of about 15.4 million. But we did have a large loss in the middle there in 2022 of about 27.8 million. But the purpose of the actuarial value is to average out those gains and losses. So we've had 3 years of gains, 1 year of losses, and those are get averaged into the actuarial value here. So we back out the remaining variance of those 4 years. We back out 80% of the most recent year, meaning we're recognizing 20% of last year, backing out 60% of 2023, meaning we're recognizing 40% and so forth. And that gives us an actuarial value of assets of just over 176 million. So that's the rate or the number we use to compare to the liabilities to recommend the contribution. And we do have limits around the actuarial value, the 90%, 110%, meaning that we won't allow the actuarial value to deviate from market value by more than 10%. If that ever happens, we're going to set it at that 10% limit. Okay. See, next slide, some funded status numbers for the current year in comparison to the prior year. So when someone asks how well funded is the plan, you always have to ask, well, which measure do you mean? Because there are numerous different measures of how well funded a plan is. And I've shown 3 of the more common ones here. I think the best measure is that one in the middle, the entry age normal accrued liability. This is generally what GASB uses for measuring the funded status. And you're generally considered here to be well-funded if you're above 80%. Right now, the plan's below that at about 67.8%, a slight decrease from last year, much of that attributable to the change in the discount rate. The present value of benefits includes all benefits expected to be earned by the current population, which means it includes future service and compensation increases of your active members. So this is generally not considered the most useful measure of plan asset or plan funded status. It may be useful if you're comparing it to another plan, but it's not particularly useful in terms of funding the liabilities of the plan, because this does include all of what we'll talk about in a minute is what we call the normal cost of the value of benefits earned in future years. All of that is included in that present value benefit number. So on the next slide, on slide 8, this shows some key results for 2025 and the preceding 3 years. First, you'll notice the population counts at the top. As I mentioned earlier, the active population is decreasing. The deferred vested population is also decreasing. This is those participants who have separated from service but have not started their benefit yet. This is generally a process of getting those people to start their benefit as they come upon normal retirement age, and so that number declining is a good thing. The retired and disabled population is growing and growing pretty consistently up to 341 now, so we almost have more retired and disabled members than active members, and as I mentioned earlier, there's now more active members in the TCRS plan than in the legacy plan here. The covered payroll, we would expect to begin to decline over time, even though those active members continuing in service will receive pay increases as that absolute number of folks declines. It's going to tend to help stabilize that number. The present value of benefits and the entry age normal past service liability are shown there. And again, we use that entry age normal past service liability to compare to the actuarial value of assets to help determine the recommended contribution. The recommended contribution is really kind of two key components. It's that normal cost, which is the value of new benefits earned by the active population of just over 2.9 million. And a second piece is the amortization of that unfunded supplemental liability number you see there of 83.5 million. So we do a 15-year amortization of that, and we create a new bucket of 15-year amortization for each year. So that number, while not shown, is another key component of the recommended contribution. Also, we add interest on the expected contribution, and that gives us that recommended contribution number of $13,378,000. And that equates to about 30.23% of active payroll. That has been increasing over time, both the dollar amount of the recommended contribution and the percent of payroll. And that's really due to the declining discount rate, growing the liability. Also, we've had some what we call actuarial losses from salary increases greater than expected over the last few years, and that's a pretty common phenomenon we see in all public sector plans. There's been a bit of a post-COVID catch-up in salaries that we're kind of seeing in a number of our public sector clients. So let's see.
You said 13, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
you said 13 million recommended contribution.
Oh, I'm sorry, 11,378,000.
Thank you.
I said that
thought
wrong.
we just lost $2 million.
No. Thanks for catching that. Let's see, on slide 9, this just shows a little bit of history of the assets and liabilities of the plan and the funded ratio. So both assets and liabilities are growing over time. Again, the liabilities are growing just from natural growth of interest on the liability plus the value of new benefits, but it's also growing because we're using a smaller discount rate. That discount rate has declined from 7.1% in 2021 to its current 6.75%. And that has, as that grows the liability, that also shrinks the funded ratio. So you've seen kind of a pattern of the funded ratio declining from about 83% in 2021 to about 68% now in 2025. Now that we're leaving the discount rate unchanged for the next few years, we would expect to see stabilization in that and general improvement as contributions are made to the plan that include both normal cost and an amortization of that unfunded liability, which helps shrink the unfunded liability.
Yes.
So I'm just be curious, because the changes in the discount ratio have been largely initiated or required by the state, right? Or that we follow the state, kind of their guidance, right?
Yeah, I would say it's partially required by the state from the standpoint that the state requires that you can't be more than 50 basis points above their assumption, which means a 7.25% maximum. But it's also been declining because we think that the rates when they were above 7% are probably too high. They need to come down a little bit more with expectation of expected return.
And I'd also share, Alderman Baggett, that the TCRS board, they made a large change at one time. They did a 50 basis point decrease in the rate. And we knew with us being a closed, older plan, that absorbing a 50 basis point decrease in 1 year would be it'd be very challenging on a budget basis because you would not be able to kind of work into a lower rate. So that was why we asked the board to do a step down of 10 basis points and get us a little ahead. And then when the state acted 50 basis points at one time to go down to 6, we were actually slightly lower than the state when they were 7.25. And we started stair-stepping down, and then they did a 50-point decline and went to 6.75, and we were slightly ahead of them. But we were able to absorb that 10 basis point a year decrease in a way that was, we were still in compliance with state law, but we didn't have to do a large decrease at one time. So that was something that staff wanted to do, was to stair-step down rather than wait and ask to do something so large in one fell swoop.
You mentioned that you have your public sector clients. I'm just kind of curious, like what that discount rate is that you're seeing in the private and healthy private pension plans?
Yeah, I would say most plans are between 6.75 and 7% inclusive of the endpoints.
So we'd be at the lower end of what you'd see probably on the private
Correct,
side.
correct. And if you look at all public sector plans, there's been a very gradual decline from about 8%, going back about 10 years, to right around 7% now. And we're getting to see that average move a little below 7%. It's also important to remember when you look at those averages, there's a lot of public sector plans out there that went through the process the Franklin plan has gone through, but maybe 20 years ago. So they're plans with very few, if no, active members, mostly retirees, and have made their investment allocation more conservative. So those plans may have a 6% discount rate because they're 70% fixed
Right.
income.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Okay, so on slide 10, this just shows the recent history of the recommended cash contribution. So that has been increasing over the last few years, again, driven significantly by some assumption changes, namely that discount rate change, but also by the what we call salary losses or losses greater than, or salary increases greater than expected for the active population has grown that recommended contribution from a little over 5 million to now a little over 11 million in a relatively short period of time. But again, we think with the stabilization of the discount rate, keeping that change, that would help stabilize these, this cash contribution requirement as well. On slide 11, this shows just a recent history of the population by active, deferred vested in green, and the retiree population in red. So you'll see the total number is shrinking from right around just under 900 to perhaps 840 by January 1, 2025, but the active population is shrinking a little more quickly. The retiree population is growing. So as we move through time, the retiree population is going to become a larger and larger total portion of the planned population, both as on a headcount basis and a liability basis. Okay. On slide 12, just some comments on the gains and losses seen for 2024. Good news is on the investment front, that was actually a gain of about $187,000. The retirement and termination decrements produce losses, so this is generally retirements less than expected, so folks perhaps putting off retirement slightly. Retiree mortality is a gain, and it actually has been a gain for most of the last several years, meaning that our assumption is probably a little conservative at 105% of the RP 2014 table, meaning that the actual number might be closer to, say, 107, 108%. But I think that it's reasonable to keep that assumption slightly conservative. Also, salary, compensation, and COLA increases are kind of lumped together, but the bulk of that is compensation increases greater than expected, a loss of about $4 million. Other items generally tend to be fairly small in there. Then last, slide 13, some information on the TCRS plan. So now we have active members of 352, and that population's been growing pretty rapidly over the last few years. The salary population in this plan about 24.4 million. So for a similar number, this compensation base is about 50% less than those in the closed plan, just virtue of the fact that this is a younger population with less service. We actually do have inactive members in this population now. Discount rate for this plan, of course, is 6.75% based on the TCRS rate. Much smaller present value of benefits in this population of 43.7 million. There are employee contributions in this plan, which factor into the contribution. The employer contribution rate is 7.44%, and that's been in a fairly tight range for the last couple of years, as low as 7.35 for 2020, based on the 2022 valuation, and 7.62% based on the 2023 valuation. The accrued liability based on just service earned to date for the population is growing rapidly, as we would expect for a plan with where folks have relatively little service, so each year of service is a significant increase percentage-wise in their benefit and their total service. So that's now at about $12.1 million. And the actuarial value of assets also rising quickly through time, now at roughly 10.9 million, giving us a funded ratio of just under 90% for the TCRS portion of the plan. So that brings me to the end. Any questions or comments or other information you'd like to see?
Yes.
So I think we're kind of like thinking through the impacts of the changes of compensation and its proportionate share of the increased, contribution versus the discount rate. Like what, 'cause we knew when we were, obviously we raised salaries, it impacts us, but I'm kind of curious to know if there is a figure on here that could say like, well, your 11%, your $11 million contribution can attribute 70% of that towards the compensation versus
Yeah.
X percent or X amount for just the underlying variable discount.
Sure. Yeah, on slide 12, I think that helps. So as I mentioned earlier, the compensation COLA increase line is kind of right in the middle there, just over 4 million of a loss. The bulk of that's due to compensation. And as you might imagine, if the active liability is $100 million and the salary increases are 5% greater than expected, it's going to be 5% of that $100 million. So it's going to be a $5 million loss to the plan. Because that compensation increase, while it may just be 1 year, it impacts their full service benefit. So if they've got 30 years of service, whatever their benefit was going to be is now, assuming they stick around to where that 5% increase works into the full compensation average, the full amount of that's going to work into their benefit. So it's going to increase the benefit by the additional amount of salary increase that was greater than expected.
So that's the compensation change, and then it is some combination of the other negative numbers that is related to the discount rate change.
Yeah, the discount rate's not a part of this total
This right
here,
here, yeah.
but that number was 1.2 million for the
but-
valuation.
Oh, it's 1.2.
Right.
Liability, 200,000 in contribution.
Right, so 1.2 million in liability, and that's comparable to this number here, because these losses are on a liability basis. So arguably, it's, the salary increases greater than expected are 3 times more than this year's discount rate change. And I think similar was true for the prior year. There's really 2 years kind of impact of the salary increase, the 2025 valuation and the 2024. Before that, the salary increases were much more in line with expectation, if not maybe a little below.
How do you foresee us getting back to the 80% funded ratio?
Yeah, it's going to be a slow process just through making contributions at the higher level. As those contributions come in, we've gone from 5 million recommended contribution to a little over 11 million now. That additional, say, $6 million just there shrinks the unfunded liability each time that contribution is made. So that's
Would it also help, or could we see some change when that 2022 $27 million valuation loss gets out of that blended value? I mean, will that?
Yes, that helps, although
little
that's
bit.
currently being recognized, 20%
in
of that
there.
each year, so,
But it's going to, okay, so
Yeah.
it'll be less by the end.
right.
Okay, thank you.
But to your point, though, an asset gain greater than expected could help shrink that unfunded liability quickly and have a nice uptick in the recommended contribution. The converse of that is a bad investment year can hurt you just as much as a good year will help you.
Don't go to Vegas.
Don't go to Vegas, right?
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for me?
Any other questions, Kevin? Thank you. There
All right.
appears to be no more questions.
Thank you very much.
Christina, you ready for the next item?
Yes, sir, and I believe our Billing and Licensing Director, Jessica
Okay.
Davy, is coming to address this.
All right, well, let's go then to item 4, consideration of resolution 2025-64, resolution to adopt an amended customer service policy, finance 9/11/25, 4.0. Jessica?
Thank you,
You're up.
Chairman Barnhill, and good afternoon, Budget and Finance Committee members. So as you probably remember, I was here with you last month. I had so much fun, I wanted to come back. So thank you for having me
Most people
again.
do.
Yes, most people do, that's what I've heard. So we discussed a couple of proposed changes to the customer service policy last month. And after our last meeting, the Law Department requested an additional review of The particular change related to the appeal process. And so after that review, we have decided to revert that portion of the policy back to the previous version of the policy. So we're no longer requesting a change to the appeal process. Rather, we are just leaving in the one recommended change, which is to our leak adjustment policy. And this is the same change that I presented to you last month with no additional updates. And just to recap that real quickly, this new policy will allow for a greater adjustment to sewer charges if the leak was in the irrigation line or the service line. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and staff would appreciate and recommend a vote for recommendation to the full board. Thank you.
Any questions? I have a question.
All right.
What is our number of water customers versus the number of sewer customers?
I was so prepared last month because I knew you were going to
To
have
do
so
that.
many questions, and then I didn't come with those answers. So I'd be happy to get those numbers
Just
for
look-
you. And
Just look at that,
yeah.
and there's probably somewhere in the back of mind a reason for that question. I don't remember what it is.
yeah, we can probably pull it up pretty quickly.
Do
I think
you-
I had all of the
Christine, do
data
you-
last month.
I mean, okay.
Folks make fun of me for carrying an audit around, but sometimes it does come in handy. For the fiscal year that ended June 30th of 2024, of course, we're working on our 2025 audit now, we had water customers of 18,461. We had sewer customers of 27,762. So of course, as we've talked about, our water service area is fairly limited in growth, but it's our number of sewer customers that increases over time.
So that was 18,000 bills that we sent out
For water.
for water.
For water, right, 27
And
for sewer.
27,000 for sewer? How did the sewer bills, who sent, we don't send those out, do we? We send those out too?
We do, yes.
So how does a customer pay HB&TS for their water and pay the city for their sewer?
So HB&TS is, all of our satellite utility customers have the meter, and they read the meter for the consumption of the water, and then we get that meter information and charge the sewer accordingly.
And build, okay. I would have been a little surprised that, I would have thought that the water and sewer would have had a little wider gap between the number of city water customers versus the city sewer customers. Because considering everybody has the city sewer, but you've got 4 different water utility districts. Okay? I think I've answered my question. I may not remember the answer tomorrow, but I remember what it is now. Okay?
And that's probably widened a little bit since June 30th of 2024, because that date is now a little old. Certainly, a lot of our new construction is in areas that, like you're describing, the water is in a utility district and not ours. But we will be publishing that new audit here in December. So, but yes, in 2024, there was about 9,000 more sewer customers.
And water customers.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
do not have a question, but I would like to make a motion that we move this forward with full recommendation to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
Proper motion to a second.
Second?
Let's do a roll call vote on that. Then Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that also. We will move forward on resolution 2025-64. Let's go to item 5 then, consideration of resolution 2025-88, a resolution authorizing the city of Franklin, Tennessee to issue its general obligation bonds in the aggregate principal amount of not to exceed $118 million. I thought those numbers were going to run off the page there for a minute. $118 million. And Christina said that the items 5 and 6 she will put those together. We would need a separate motion on each one of them. Christine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is the largest single bond issue that the city has considered. Certainly, we borrowed more than this in total for the wastewater treatment plant expansion. We borrowed about $130 million for that project. But certainly, in any one individual bond issuance, this general obligation bond for Series 2026 is the largest one proposed. And certainly, it does feel like we have just ended bond issuance season because we closed the 2025 bond issue back at the end of March and in spring. However, and that was the first general obligation bond issue we had had in 6 years, since 2019. So we had a pretty long span there of, certainly we did have capital projects that were still going on during that period, but they were either in design or we were using cash to fund, or we were spending the bond proceeds from 2019 until 2022. So we are in a construction season right now. Before we do jump in, I'll give a little bit of preference. Michael Walters-Young and I certainly have talked quite a bit about the scheduling for the capital projects and the debt. And the last capital improvement program looked at issuing bonds in 2026, 27, and 28. But we do believe we know enough about these projects, and they're far enough along that we can do a 2026 issuance, not issue in 2027, and come back then in 2028. So instead of doing two smaller issues in 26 and 27, those projects are far enough along, and you'll be seeing those projects here in just a moment, that we believe we can consolidate. Certainly, there are issuance costs related to issuing bonds, underwriters' expenses. So being able to consolidate those two issues into one, there is an economy of scale to that for projects that will happen or are already underway. Most importantly, general obligation bonds for new money projects, they're funding capital improvement or needs of the city that are considered capital assets that we may not think of as capital, but they are part of our fixed assets of the city. And the first one line item is something that you have seen in every general obligation bond issue since 2017, is replacement of fire apparatus. And this recommendation comes from a couple of things. Certainly, fire apparatus is very expensive, and it has become much more expensive in the last decade. There's really not a truck under $1 million anymore. They do last a long time. They do go into service. We amortize those over 15 years, but the intention is for those to stay in frontline service 15, and they do help after 15 years in a backup capacity. And they also take many years to actually get those after the orders are placed. So all three of these pieces of apparatus, the board has given staff authorization to order. They were ordered last December to lock in prices, but we will not be getting those trucks in until actually I think it's 2027. It takes a while for those to arrive. Major road resurfacing is a program that's been going on for many years. There is, of course, resurfacing that's funded with our State Street Aid program. But that really has not been enough to really, on these major roads, be able to keep up with the needs. And there's been an annual program for some time. And beginning in 2017, we had an annual allocation from bond issues. And this request from the Streets Department for 7.5 would be their request for the paving seasons of 2026 and 2027. And that's they've pretty much finished up their paving season here for 2025. They have to get done before the weather turns. It is temperature dependent. And then they start up spring, and then they can go again till late October. But this would be their allocation for the next 2 years. We did have Pearl Bransford Park. We called it a different name in the 2025 bond issuance. However, now we have our real name, and we're very pleased to call this Pearl Bransford Park. And the first funding allocation was with the 2025 bond issue, knowing that we needed more funds. And then during that period, after the bond resolution was approved, before we actually closed, but it was after that first all the documents were underway, the board did approve the Robinson Lake construction. And certainly, there's going to be a point, I know that we may think of them as two projects, but there's going to become a point to the public, they think of that as Pearl Bransford Park with the lake feature, of course, there. So we do need additional funds, and this will be the final tranche of bond proceeds for that project. We do next have two projects that are in the CIP that you have looked at for a while, but our city engineer believes he is requesting funds over the next couple of years for these projects in the phases that he'll be working on. The Long Lane road improvements, 2.5 million, Church Street road improvements of 2.5 million. Both of these will be in different phases once we get to 2028, and we expect that there'll be additional bond funds requested when we do the next GEO bond issue. But he does have work coming up over the next couple of years to, certainly the early parts of, there's phases of capital projects that don't spend a lot of money compared to later stages, but they're very important to move those projects forward, and that's where he'll be with Long Lane and Church Street. So they are on this list. And then the largest, of course, project, dollar amount wise for this bond issue is New City Hall, $85 million. This is the debt that's being requested for this project. It's not the total project budget. There is cash funding in this project as well, but it is about 83% debt funded, and that's where this $85 million request. However, and this was the primary project when we were looking at whether we needed to break that apart into a 26 and a 27 bond issue, was really where will we add in the City Hall projects? What had our project managers learned from taking down the old City Hall and getting the site prepared? They know a lot more now than they did a year ago before that demolition, and so we've been staying in touch with them to really understand the schedule. And now that they know much more about bids that they've taken since a year ago, but also they know the conditions of the site. And so this recommendation to issue the $85 million in early 2026, of course, that sets a 3-year clock to spend those funds, because with tax-exempt bonds, at the easiest way to explain it, you really need to spend those proceeds in 3 years, in 36 months. And that's something that our project managers for the project and our city administrator believe is realistic to do.
We do expect to have our guaranteed maximum price on the project around the February, March timeframe of 2026. So that will help us, I think, fine tune this number a little bit more. But for where we are right now, this is a good working number.
And certainly, we do draft the documents, the indenture documents for the bond issue, that if there are some remaining proceeds, we do have other capital projects that those could be used for. You certainly can't use bond proceeds to pay utility bills or operating expenses of the city, but we do have other, especially if you have some bids come in really, really well and you maybe have an extra, a small amount of funds over, we within our budget and accounting can allocate those to other capital projects that, road projects, for example, that those would be perfectly fine to be, or parks projects that would be fine legally to use those proceeds for. So thus, we have the $117 million that we, for purposes of the resolution, round up to $118 million.
Any questions? If 85 is 83%, 17% would be approximately 20 million then, right? So that means that, are we saying that the entire project, all of it, is 105 million?
102 is what we're carrying in the CIP funding model.
And 3 million contingency?
Well, within that 102, there's significant amount of contingency.
Okay.
So I think the last range we had all in was between 96 and I think 107, something like that. So 102 is what we've carried in there, and there's a still pretty significant contingency. The building itself, I think, is right around 62 million, and then we've got all the other elements between park, plaza, parking, streetscape, all those other pieces that take us up to a number around the 100 million.
So if so then if I were to ask, the 4 million or so that we did set aside for employees to be able to have a place to work, that's included in the 102 or 3 or 4 or 5?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. The 9.2 million to tear down the old building is included in that?
All the costs have been for site prep and
In there.
excavation, all that's rolled into there. Those first two bid packages, which actually to this point are about 3 million under budget or under project projections. And schedule-wise, we're pretty much right on track with that.
What about Studio 8 then? How much was theirs? Do you know?
They're within that number. I may be able to pull that number up for you, but that's all within
So how
the
much?
the project cost.
That, two things. How much is Studio 8 and how much have we paid them then? I'm just trying to, I would like to have a number that when we end in 2027, that we're under the number that we talked about on the 16th day of this month. Or even with it, I don't know that it's necessary to be under it if we're budgeting for this. And I'm fine with 105. 105 is a number that I've looked at for the last 3 or 4 years, ever since we kind of settled in on this right here. And I know we've said the sticks and bricks is this, and something else is something else, and something else was something else. But if it comes out to be 102, 103, 104, 105, that is what it is. And that's what we've got in here then, so.
And I will share that back, I believe it was early May, the board approved the intent resolution for this bond issue, which would allow for reimbursement of allowable expenses from this bond issue for when it occurred. And that was actually, we set up the accounting, and so the demolition for City Hall, which began right after that, and the site prep from this summer, I do expect that piece of the project that has occurred now before the bonds close, we will be reimbursing ourselves with bond proceeds, because certainly site work is allowable from reimbursement of bond proceeds. And that, the timing of that intent resolution, we're certainly glad to get you expenses on other, various aspects of the project, but we are planning to reimburse the city with bond proceeds for that demolition and site work that's been going on since the intent
Yeah,
resolution.
that's all been
We've got that.
identified.
So we're pretty confident that we will be in the new City Hall for Christmas 2027.
2 years from now, we should be in. That's,
All right.
that's what the schedule says to us, and we're driving towards. I do have information for you on the design, and I'll include this in the board's weekly update too, because you'd asked this when we did the last project update. To date, but for our design team, so that's OHM and Studio 8, we spent $6.8 million on the design work to date. The total contracted amount, including all the amendments, is about 10.5. So there's things through
10% of the
the
project.
the bidding and the, the construction components that will continue on. But yeah, the whole, all in, yeah, right around 10% in design costs, and we've spent 6.8 million to date.
Questions?
No, I think that's good, because I think it's important. You have on this slide, and we're in the middle of various activities, government activities, elections. And that 85, that actually, and I think it's to your point, it's not just for the city hall. There's 62 million for the building. The plaza, this is on the website. There's probably updated numbers, but this is what's on the public website. 2 million for restrooms and large plaza, pedestrian access from the square. 200 parking spots, 16 million. Commercial space is included in this too. There's going to be that 4,500 square feet commercial on Third Avenue. Streetscape, and you think about it, the only downtown street that doesn't have streetscape and doesn't look like every other street in downtown is Third Avenue. And largely that was put off anticipating, I think, something of this nature. So that is streetscapes, as we know, are expensive, but beautiful, and one thing people love. And then the utility work, I can only imagine the utilities. And then the 1 acre park is what I think people miss a lot too, is that there's a 1 acre city park included in this. So while the slide, and that's all right, there's nothing wrong with the slide, but it is not just City Hall. I'm sure internally, you kind of think it's that whole project, that block redevelopment. But it's a lot more, you know, there's, I'll stop there. But I do think that's important for the public to hear, and this is one way they hear it. This is really a downtown, solving a number of problems downtown. Not just a new building for $58-60 million. It's a lot more than that. But I'm with Alderman Barnhill. I do think these updates, I think we should be getting one maybe next month. If I'm still around, you know, I'll get it, but, I'll be watching if not.
You can be around.
I'll come no matter what. But I think I'd like to see those, costs, the guaranteed maximum price and continuing to apply pressure was the whole idea of this, what y'all have been doing, and y'all have been doing it well. And I think every meeting we get that report, we're seeing progress, and we're seeing that what I think the citizens want, which is this downward pressure just on cost overall, but also just making sure that we're making smart decisions. And to date, I've been very pleased with the decisions y'all been doing with the contractor at risk and the owner's rep. So it is a misconception out there that we have I don't know, I've heard up to someone asked me, we had a $300 million city hall. And, you know, I mean, there's all these stuff, and you know. So I think the messaging here, and just so for us to, you know, make sure we communicate clearly to the public that there's a lot to this situation, and it's not just one big building. I don't think people know there's gonna be a park there. I'm almost certain,
I don't
95% of
I
people
don't think they do either.
don't know that there's going to be a park there. 1 acre, I mean, a beautiful park. So anyway, thank you.
And you have more than 2 minutes. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to reiterate what the discussion was, again, there's a lot of need for working in transparency. And for those that are watching at home or watching a recorded version of this, if you're just going to the City of Franklin webpage and you type in capital projects, when it pulls the page up, there are 4 primary links. It has capital investment program, the capital investment projects list, and then the capital projects dashboard. And to what Alderman Barnhill and Alderman Baggett were just saying, those updates can be found on the capital projects dashboard simply by clicking on that link and then selecting any project across the city and seeing all of those updates and all of the dollars allocated all the way across the board from start to finish.
Christine, is that item 5? Go to item 6, then we'll come back to item 5 and 6.
I do have just a little bit more
Okay,
in the presentation, and then that this is the consolidation of the two.
Okay.
The two resolutions are both related to authorizing the bond issuance, and I think the rest of this. But this was a very important conversation on the projects and understanding what they are, and I'll just work through the debt piece of this. Certainly, there is a financing team with the general obligation bond issue, and I believe everyone's familiar with the players. Bassberry and Sims is our bond counsel, PFM is our financial advisor. We will be doing a competitive sale, which we always do here at Franklin. Even our refunding issues have been competitive sales, and that identifies the underwriter for the bond issue. We do ask for 2 bond ratings, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, which we would be doing later this fall and early winter, and asking for affirmation of our AAA bond rating. And then we do, of course, have U.S. Bank as our paying agent that does ensure that all of the investors receive their interest and principal payments. And this is something that with the general obligation bonds it's a fairly simple security, but it's a very powerful security for the bonds. It is secured with the full faith and credit of the city of Franklin's property taxing power, and both in Tennessee and in federal IRS regulations relating that allows for tax exempt bonds to be issued. Should any governing body, which we would not expect this to happen, but any governing body that fails to set a tax rate to repay the interest and principal, there is a legal recourse for the investors to require that payment happens. And on rare occasions, that does have, your paying agent does have to step in with the trustee and ensure that happens. These are tax exempt bonds that's a very important to our taxpayers because that does reduce the interest expense. There are lots of rules that we are following throughout putting together this bond issue, and we have to make a lot of promises going forward to fulfill the requirements of tax exempt bonds, and that's how the proceeds are used. They have to be spent timely. We do annual disclosures. So there's lots of things that are done to issue tax exempt bonds and keep them tax exempt, but it is what's beneficial to our taxpayers and makes it the most advantageous way to borrow money for capital projects that are governmental in nature. And it's about a 70% of a full taxable rate. That can change when rates are really low. It's maybe not quite 70%. It can be a little bit higher when the rates are very low, but of course right now rates are very slightly coming down. But they're still, in a historically, tax exempt rates are very attractive for financing governmental projects. And we do have these two authorizing resolutions, and they are required both by Tennessee statute, and they also are written in order to be in accordance with the IRS requirements for tax exempt bonds. And these are fixed rate, and that's something that this slide indicates, that we do pay interest twice a year. We'll pay principal once a year. We schedule that principal payment for after property taxes are due, so that we'll have those funds in hand for liquidity purposes. And that there is what's called a call date. These bonds may be refinanced once you get to a call date, but the investors are protected for the first 10 years. And we'll, in just one moment, show that we do recommend a final maturity in 25 years for the portion of the debt that's related to the new city hall and the redevelopment of that corridor. The 2026, just a little bit of information about the structure. We do ask for a not to exceed of $118 million, but depending on market conditions, on the day that we go out to price, we do a process called resizing. And we have a not to exceed of $118 million. We're only going to issue enough proceeds to fund these projects and pay the cost of issuance. And it's typically a little bit less than the not to exceed amount. We just want to ensure that we are able to get those projects funded. But if we don't need any proceeds above the project amount, we reduce that borrowing amount the day of pricing. And it's a math calculation once we get the lowest interest rate, and then we get their yields and their coupons, and then we just do a resizing. We do have a structure because we have some different projects with different maturities. We do amortize fire engines over 15 years. We do the major road resurfacing over 10 years. The parks projects, the 2 road projects for engineering are over 20. And we did amortize the City Hall project and the corridor over 25. So it's actually a little bit of a front-loaded principal structure so that we can just size accordingly with what we would like to do for the life of the assets. Certainly the parks are going to last much longer than 20 years, but that's something that we like to do is fund those on as short of an amortization as reasonable. And then I want to just conclude with just to show a snapshot of what our total general obligation debt service will likely look like. We don't have final, of course, interest amounts yet, but in the current interest rate environment, we've been talking about this for some time with the committee, that we are getting ready to start stair-stepping down. We are what's called at max annual debt service here in 2027. And then as you see, even with layering on the estimate for 2026, our final debt service payment before issuing any more debt was in 2045. And even then, that was going to be the only bond issue outstanding once we got past 2039. So because of the city has done a really great job of structuring these bond issues to to not go out too long. We definitely don't have any what's called backloaded principal, like interest-only loans that go out a long time. So we are amortizing principal quickly. And I hope that this graph gives you a little bit of comfort that once we get through these max annual debt service, we start stair-stepping down. And certainly that is something that our budget and performance, Michael Walters Young, takes into account as he's preparing the capital investment plans going forward, is what this debt service curve looks like. So I hope the illustration is something that's helpful to you.
It's going the right direction.
That's a for someone like me and in the world I live in, it's a wonderful chart to look at because we should be proud because it does, when you get, a lot of places have a max annual debt service far, far out, and you're always looking toward having to grow a debt service obligation. But in our case, we're getting ready to move past max annual debt service, and our new max annual debt service is going to be lower than the one in 27. So yes, this is a large bond issue. However, we do have, the existing debt service is structured in a way to allow us to have this capacity. And we do issue, all of this debt is fixed rate, so with the exception of the 2026, that's an estimate, all the other debt service payments are known. Those principal and interest payments are fixed. A brief schedule to conclude my comments. We're here today together on October the 16th. We would like to ask for your recommendations on these two resolutions to move this to the full board. And our plan was to come back at the second meeting in November to the work session and go through this, maybe not as, whatever type of speed the board would like, but we'd like to go through this with the full board on November 25th, and then ask for full board consideration on December 9th of both of the resolutions, and work toward closing in the month of February.
So no budget and finance in November. Go to the workshop on the 25th. And then no budget and finance meeting in December, I don't.
We do have a committee on December, I believe, 4th or 3rd, Margaret.
that's- yeah.
But this committee we're asking for your recommendation today. We go to full board work session in November, ask the full board to consider approval of both these resolutions December the 9th. That just gives everyone some time to look through the information.
All right.
And that concludes my prepared remarks. If there's any questions for us.
Any questions? Then I will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2025-88 and forward it to the full board.
Mr. Chair, I'll move to approve.
Proper motion to a second. I'll second it then. Yeah. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I hope the chair votes yes, since he seconded the motion. Let's go to item number 6 and do the resolution 2025-90. And let's hear the approval on that and forward that also to the full board.
Sir, I move to approve.
Proper motion is there a
Second.
second? Second. Then let's have a roll call vote on that also. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote on that?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So is there any other comments that you need to make on items 5 and 6?
No, sir. Thank you for your recommendations.
All right. Then let's go to item 7, which is consideration of guidance on appropriations to outside agencies. Michael? Norma? Come on down.
You've been working hard.
Michael, you're up.
Good afternoon, y'all. Michael Walters Young, your Chief Budget Performance Officer. With me is Norma Lockney from our Office of Budget and Performance. Last month, we came before you to review sort of our drafted guidance regarding appropriations guidelines and had a lot of good feedback and a lot of good conversation. This month is to review with you the idea of a scorecard And there's 2 years of comparisons, and I'll walk you through at your places, as well as in your packets online. You have paper copies of scorecards, what we call 1 and 2, and I'll refer to those as we go through the slides. Again, the purpose, just want to remind you of what the appropriations to outside agencies are, and then the criterion process. As a reminder, we provide appropriations to outside agencies for financial support of those agencies that provide services the municipal government cannot, or we do not. We do so in a way that aligns with our vision, mission, and strategic plan goals. The request of staff from last month was to develop a scorecard where key questions about each appropriation could be presented in a summary form. There was a request to provide multiple years for comparison to see how they match up, and to ensure that proposed guidance on funding limits and tie-ins to core services were vetted. So as I said, you have 2 scorecards. The first scorecard, which is the first piece of paper, as we call affectionately scorecard 1, is to summarize the appropriation materials as they come in. So I'll go to the next slide. You can see here, and this is a scorecard really and a checklist that we have had for many years inside the Office of Budget and Performance. Are the materials complete? Did they fill out the application? Do they have the statement of use of funds? Have they provided their audit or other financial form of fiscal review? Do they have their proof of tax exempt status or the state financial form? Are they registered with the state of Tennessee? Have they provided their board of directors list? Have they provided their certificate of insurance? Have they completed a City of Franklin vendor form? And have they provided us with appropriate tax documentation, or in this case, a W-9? And you can see we break it out into the green category, which is appropriations to governments, the blue category, which is the main focus of the conversation here, the appropriations to charitable 501c3s. Then you have the appropriations to the chamber in yellow, outside agencies, GNRC in purple, and then sort of the appropriation to the Convention and Visitors Bureau and one-time appropriations, in this case, to the African American Heritage Society. The second scorecard, which is primarily what we spoke of last month, provides the agency, the requested amount, the total budget of the organization, the percentage of ask, whether or not the request is new, what is the strategic plan goal tie-in, an evaluation of core service, and what was actually funded. Now, this is our first attempt to do this. We would ask them, to provide the strategic plan goal. So we made a supposition of what appropriate strategic plan goal would work with each agency. We also have, and this is where this gets, how should I put this? Objectively subjective. The core service, yes or no? Does it tie into a core service and what department it applies to? You'll note that the example on the screen is very limited. And what we would ask you to think of, and certainly we will continue to work on, is are there other core services and other departments for some of these agencies that, not all agencies are going to tie into a core service of the City of Franklin that we have given money to. But the point is to highlight those that definitely do, that we want to make sure that we're able to, that augment and support operations. So for example, you see Bridges and Davis House here on this list as tying into the core service of law enforcement and police functions. This is a judgment call, but again, I said objectively subjective. The other aspect of this where we have made the supposition is we do not have necessarily everyone's information on all years of their total budgets and of their total revenues, which we will be requesting as part of the appropriation process from this time moving forward. The example that's on the screen and in your handouts, if there is something that goes above the guidance that we went over last time, so total budget requests, total request over 25% of their total budget, over 5% in the first year of ask, or if the total amount requested overall is greater than 1% of the city's budget, with all of these combined, we would shade them and flag them as you see on the screen in that pink or red flag, or automate it and make it flashing, or giant X's or something. But be able to really kind of highlight where it does not comply with the guidance as we proposed. In your places, in the handouts, you have both 2025 and 2026. When we ask for 2027, we'd then be able to give you that 3-year trend, and so you could see where things are going. Alderman Potts, we have not developed a tool yet to do the auto-linking to all of these. I will not promise that we can, simply because each packet, when it's fully scanned, is somewhere between 3 and 12 megs, and I don't know that Civic Clerk can handle that. But we will find a way to still make sure that everything is accessible.
Thank you.
Now, what about on the
Yes, ma'am.
one that we have and the one that's out here, that, you know, it's something like doorstep, share bill? You know,
Yes, so this example, I believe on the screen, is the one for 2025. But, so if you turn to the next page in your handout,
Okay.
it matches the
okay.
sample on the screen. I tried to blow this up on screen as best I could, and I know it's still very, very small, but that's also why I gave you paper handouts, so you could kind of see the comparisons between the 2 years. The other thing, of course, that we'll have for the 2027 requests, when you evaluate them, is we won't have the amount that we've actually budgeted, because obviously the discussion will be how much do you wish to budget. But we have all of this information now because the fiscal budget is complete. In terms of next steps, we'd love your feedback today. And then everything else is as it was. We would revise our guidance to applicants, and we would let them know what is now going to be required of them, have the month-long outside application period, and then, of course, collate the submissions and continue to refine this scorecard and discuss at your April Budget and Finance meeting. Mr. Chairman.
Open up comments or questions.
This is awesome. This is amazing. This is spot on. Good job. I mean, because I'm already learning things, and just viewing it like this, I think that I would have seen things differently. You know, everyone's going to have, oh, we should add this column. But I don't do too much. But I am curious to know, like, longevity of how long some of these have been on the.
Sure.
And like, because if some of these are, we've been giving it to, you doing this for 20 years,
Yep.
Probably more.
and we don't hear from them, you know, or what, you know, what have you. I think that is a useful piece of information.
Yep.
On the core service determination, I think is gonna be really critical. And I know that's gonna be also the hardest one. I would like for us to ask city, we can assume that the same people probably will apply for the next year. So there's probably something we can do ahead of budget season, where we ask the city team, do you engage with any of these organizations?
involved in your service?
Or do you ever refer someone to this? Do you ever engage with them on that? And real simple, but that would be helpful. I mean, don't make it too complicated, people won't do it, but, I think that's I think that getting into this core, because, you know, billing and, it's not billing and. Billing and licensing is the new name, not so new anymore. Billing and licensing, like, I'm sure if there's utility bills and someone can't pay it, we have our own program, but GraceWorks. does that
is
too.
a partner on that.
Right,
for sure.
they're a partner on that. And so I know that to be the case. Hard bargain, you know, and it's incumbent on the applicant or the requesting entity, but also, you know, to establish that core service determination and give us how they engage with the city. But I think that's gonna be really important, because I think this shows us really how, and some of these people are gonna respond if you send, staff and the applicant, and they probably don't engage with the city at all. And there is no synergies, but it's a good thing, right? It could be just a thing that, and that's what I'd like to look at the next review, and I think the public would appreciate, this is great. I think the transit items, there's a transit alliance, that seems like it would be a government, quasi-government, but I don't know what it is. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So yeah, I think this is gonna be helpful in, I'm not gonna ask the questions now, but like, next year, when looking at this, that will be helpful. And I appreciate you putting in the Visitors Bureau as well, because I think, well, all of these, because also, I would say these have core services. If we didn't have the Chamber or a Visitors Bureau, basically every other city in America would have some sort of economic development or visitor
they do.
initiative, where they would have an office in City Hall that did, there's gonna be something. So I think that's important that to me, although it has never been here, maybe it hasn't been in a long time, maybe it used to be.
It used to be. when
Used to
it
be.
was just in the old mall building. They had, long ago, there were some, other things that had their offices in that building.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's fantastic. This would be good. The first page, I'm not as concerned with seeing all these yeses and nos as much as maybe I am, if they're all yeses, then they just meet maybe you just have what they didn't have. And but whatever is easiest, you're probably doing this anyway or some form.
We wanted to show you the first one because it's a tracker that we've had for many years. And they should all be yeses, because these are required materials in order to be considered for funding application. And so we at least wanted to show that. We do have situations where sometimes for one or two, the audit is not complete for that last year. So they provide the fiscal year's audit of the most completed year. If we go 2 years without an audit, that's when we go, wait a minute. But if it's a timing issue and it takes a month later to get it, but, you can validate with their auditors that they are actively working on it and they're in good standing otherwise, and there's no other issues that have been raised, there's no external comptroller investigations, there's no issues to the IRS, then those we generally put forward in front of you as well, because we know that it will be resolved satisfactorily.
Well, if a flag popped up and, so let's say 6 months into the fiscal year, would you stop the payment? I mean, you're doing it quarterly.
We
Correct.
have the right to, yeah.
We certainly have the right to.
Yeah, and the contract provides for that.
Yep.
We needed to.
We have gone to each and every single one of these outside agencies has to sign a contract on an annual basis for that particular year's funding amount. They're all standardized, they all go through our law department. And so there's a series of mandatory criterion that they must follow that spells all of this out. And we have this year with one of our applicants. We did not end up paying initially because we did not have an executed contract. And again, if the city does not have an executed contract, we're not going to pay anyone. So that matter has been resolved, and that is, that those payments are now proceeding. But again, do due diligence, make sure that any questions are answered to protect the taxpayers' dollars, and then provide the services.
Mr. Chair, everybody involved, great work. It looks great.
Thank you, sir.
This is awesome. I'm going to flip over to, excuse me, scorecard number 2. And I do think there should be a requirement over here on core services, yes and no, that I would think that they should be the ones making the selection and maybe even providing comment as to how it relates, if that's not already the process right now. I think that could be good, and maybe if there has to be other, where maybe it's not hitting our core service, but it is related to the totality of what we're trying to do here. The other thing I was looking at, no pun intended there, was if you flip on to the back of scorecard number 2, and again, this is our first iteration here, is underneath the next section of other outside entity funding, if underneath that there was another section for totals, so that we could actually have a running balance to see if we're actually saying, okay, of government agencies, this is approximately, 14%, nonprofit agencies is, 72%, whatever the case might be. But it will give us just kind of a little bit of a running total, but then also with that, and the amount of money that we allocate each year is 1% of the budget. Is that correct?
No, the
No?
amount of money
Make the
that we allocate is, the guidance that we have just talked about is that it is not to exceed
Not to exceed, excuse me.
1%
Yeah.
of the total budget. It currently is
But that's their individual allocation.
the total of all
Total of the
appropriations
allocation.
is less than 1%. If you have we have an operating budget currently of around $125 million. The total amount here is around 700,000. That's less than 1%.
Right. And that's-
0.6-ish.
And that's kind of where I'm going with it, is in that last section, if you've got your running balance and you're able to say, here's our cap, and this is how far below we are of that cap. It just kind of gives us an idea just to look at the bigger picture. As we get further down the road, we've got more versions of this. A couple of months down, we've got the final version. I would think that maybe we should have some type of an invitation to all of these organizations to come and meet us here and walk through what the new forum looks like, how it's going to be done, and then answer any questions that they might have. And that would be our first time to go at it. And then I would think that maybe we needed to have an annual meeting as a refresher of saying, hey, if you plan on applying, come on in, here's any additional updates that we have to the form as it continues to mature.
That'd be a lot of,
What's that?
Are
that'd
you
be a
in?
lot.
Yeah.
Are you asking that each one of these organizations come in and make a presentation?
Not make a presentation, no, just gain understanding about how the tool should be filled out, making sure that and they could watch it online or watch a recording, but making sure that they know, that they're well informed to do it.
So if I understand, your suggestion is that we have a training
Yes.
for all outside agencies with the criterion that is being laid forward.
Yep.
I think it's their obligation to seek the training and understand the training without necessarily, I would not, if we're having something that comes into the committee, and we've got all this, because I've gone through some of these, and you could go through, it might take, I've been through an hour or more on one of these contribution presentations going through, so you could sit through, this would be longer than the budget and finance process that we go through in January, February, and March then. So I would not look forward to doing that.
My purpose is not for us to do training, but to make sure that these entities or these organizations know how to fill it out. And if they have somewhere where they need to go to get the questions, just so they have the right place.
The new piece is the new things that they're going to be, what's new to them is strategic plan and core
Core
service
service.
determination. And really, if staff can just maybe record something and explain what that is.
Put
and
it online.
That would be,
Yep.
we don't need a meeting here, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I hear you also saying that, yes, these people need to understand what we're talking about when we're saying strategic plan, what we want in that update, and that, I think.
That's where
all
we're
you're
headed,
saying.
we're trying to put structure around it. If we're gonna put structure there, they need to understand why we put the structure there, that's all.
We can enhance the guidance
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's available for applicants.
yep.
The only thing on core service I would just offer, I really think that needs to be a city determination. I mean,
Okay.
they're all advocates for what they do, so they're all gonna think it's critically mission important. And to us, it's really great in the community, but it may not tie to what we consider to be a core service. And when we say core service, we mean, if you didn't do it for us, we'd have to find a way to do it. And that's very different than it's just really valuable in the community. So, I mean, we can ask for them to give us some feedback, but I really think the determination ought to come from your staff and the most aligned department that uses that service.
And that sounds
Does that
good, I
make
just want
sense?
them to understand if they're.
Yeah, I think we
coming-
communicate
Sure.
what we mean by that,
Yes, yeah.
but I think at the end of the day, I think you would probably be better served to look to us to say, yes, the police department absolutely needs bridges. If they weren't here, we would be finding shelter for
Good point.
families in
Good
these
point.
difficult situations.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out.
Good example.
One other question real fast, just to close this out, and I think Alderman Barnhill, you may have been kind of speaking to this. If an organization fails, becomes defunct, closes down, in our contract right now, we have the quarterly option to just stop payment, is that right? Or how does that work? Not that we want any of these organizations to go under by any stretch of the means.
If the financial status of an organization changes, then certainly we have the ability to stop the payments. The contracts, the way they are written, say that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen has appropriated X amount of dollars, and the city of Franklin and the entity agrees that that amount of money would be paid over the course of the fiscal year in quarterly installments. If, however, there's a mitigating legal circumstance, contract does allow for
Really, at
city-
the city's discretion. I mean,
I mean, it
it's
is.
pretty
It-
one-sided.
it's our
We can just
appropriation.
say, we're done, and give notice.
Okay,
Whatever
good.
that reason
That
might
answers
be.
my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know where you would put it on here, and I don't know that necessarily want it. But I tell you, one other thing that would be somewhat interesting, you don't know who else is supporting this organization, do you?
It all depends upon the materials that they
Send in?
submit. We are going to be asking for their total budget.
But
Okay.
We can certainly ask to see major categories, if there is other governmental agencies or contributions or,
if the county is supporting it,
Yeah,
if
other governments
United-
support
if United Way is supporting it, if somebody else, another organization was supporting it, and they're still coming to the city, my contention has always been, to a certain extent, if the county's supporting it, we're already supporting it. And do they give you any information like that?
We do not currently ask for that information, but Michael, I don't know if you can pull up the guidelines that we had created from the last meeting. You can take a look at those questions again. We do have the core values in there. And we had the multiple questions that we were going to ask them
Okay.
going forward. So if there's something on there that you would like to add, we can add that to the guidelines.
Well, is that, I mean, that's my interest, it may not be anybody else's. Yeah.
No, I think that there's value in that because if there's other entities that are providing the support, it is good to know who it is, maybe how long that they've been doing it. And I don't know if it's out of scope for us to ask what that amount is, if they,
I don't think it's out of scope.
So you can see the very last one there that's like number G, whatever. State if your agency receives any other additional financial support.
From government entities.
Yes, yes. And then we also have state if the city of Franklin provides any other support, which is bullet point F.
Okay. I mean, I just know that, this has been a long time ago. I just know that Chad didn't tell you when United Way did it, when the county did it, whenever the city did it, whatever other, somebody's giving a donation or whatever. You had to list all those. I mean, you had it in the budget, but if if you didn't specifically pick it out of the budget, you would be saying the budget is $200,000 and they're asking for 30 from the city. And where does the other 170 come from then? That's just an example. But anyway, yeah, if you can, if you can't.
So do you want us to add the amount as well
I'd like
on
to see the
G?
amount see if, as long as it's not some legal obligation that we can't ask that, and I don't think it is. Yeah, I see now if they're doing dues or something where a $2 class, I'm not interested in 10 people going into a yoga class, give you $2 each, and the class generates $20. That's not what we're talking about. But I'm saying there's numerous pretty good sized agencies, and I don't know what United Way does now. I think they may have combined with Davidson County.
Middle Tennessee.
Yeah,
United
Middle
Way
Tennessee
now.
or something else. So it may not be as functional now, maybe as it was 10 years ago or so. So, yeah, if we can't, this is good.
Okay.
So I do have a follow-up question on, Michael, something you were saying earlier about, and again, I don't want to add more columns, but I also do want to be able to see trending and how many years somebody may have, that we may have been supporting the group. So if there is, you have first-time request right here. If there was another column that's years of COF support.
Yeah, what I wrote down was we can put down, to the extent that we have the record, what is the first year that we began giving them support. Now, I will tell you, cut off probably will be into the first decade of the 2000s, so we can get you at least 15 years. We do have some scanned budgets that may have results back to the 1990s.
I think 2000 is more than.
But I just, certainly the last 10 to 15 years, but
Yeah.
it was part of the files that we looked at in the finance department before we left Old City Hall. There were still appropriation requests from like 1993
That hadn't been soaked by the rain.
that hadn't been soaked by the rain, correct?
Any other questions? Mike, thank you. Thank you very much. Then if there's no other questions on the outside agencies, let's go to monthly reports for October 2025. Margaret?
Good afternoon. I'm just going to hit three highlights today. Local sales tax for July. This was, of course, the first month of the new fiscal year. It was an increase year over year of about $300,000. We did also add one schedule this month, for parkland impact fees. Just to note, we did this one a little different from the road impact fees, just because not every quadrant has impact fees in parkland, so it would have looked very odd to have many years of zero or very minor in one quadrant than another. So we just lumped all parkland fees together. We also changed it to dollar amounts just to give you all a better frame of reference. So for 2025, it's 164,000 more than 2026 is 164,000 more than 2025 and more in the budget by $18,000. So that's a new schedule that we added. And then I also just want to make a note for the conference center. You do notice that it is a loss of $131,000, but most of August they were closed due to renovations. So you have to keep that in mind. So that'll look skewed for this year and next year's comparison.
I'll put Eric on the spot. I noticed in the paper today that the county voted on extending the contract, and it went 18 to something or other
Yeah, for the conference center.
for the conference center.
Yeah.
We do 8 and whole,
Yeah.
so the county is 18 and 8, that's 18 and 6,
Something like that, yeah.
something like that.
And they did modify the agreement, so we will be bringing it back to you in its new form.
Okay?
They shortened the term to 5 years.
From,
I think it had been 10 with an option to extend further.
So they went
So
to
they,
five.
they shortened the term. So well, we'll just bring it back in that cycle. You're going to have to revisit it because you're going to need an operator for the center in a few years anyway, but that's fine. They were more comfortable with the shorter term, so.
Where are we right now on the hotel motel tax from the state?
We are still awaiting an opinion from the Attorney General's office. So that has been submitted through the Comptroller's office, and we're waiting to receive that.
No ETA on that?
No, not
Okay,
really.
fair enough.
We know it's there, but we, yeah.
Fair enough.
I ask the same question on a regular basis.
Yeah, I guess we should enter in the committee with a little humor. If there's no other items or anything come before the committee, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.